So, day 2 of Yelling into the Void. Either way, I'm Trista Marie, and today I'm talking about the movie Dead End. The 2003 one specifically. Oddly enough, there's quite a few movies titled Dead End. Actually, when my mom wanted to show me this movie, I first put on a different one that started out with like a prostitute and a pimp arguing, so not the right movie. This movie is about a family on their trip to having Christmas dinner with a family member who lives somewhat far away. And before I go through this movie in depth, I want to say that I love this movie. It is genuinely one of my favorite horror movies and just movies in general. Like top 50. It's great. It's so scary and just like interesting. I know that's really vague, but it's true. And the characters are developed so well, which we don't get enough of in horror. I mean, I personally, as a horror fan, believe that, there are many examples of that people just often overlook when they're talking about like, blanket ideas about the horror genre. But the horror genre does have, not so good characters more often than most other genres, unfortunately. So I also want to say that this movie just has such a creepy, like, setting and feel to it. It's just, like, a repeating road surrounded by a bunch of trees, and, like, there's no houses, and it's, like, at night. And goddamn, that's just perfect. So like I said, this family, consists of the mom, the dad, and their 2 young adult children, Richard and Marion. Marion has a boyfriend named Brad, so basically that's all the characters in this movie. So it starts with the father starting to fall asleep as he's driving. So that's not good. But luckily he wakes up and gets them out of harm's way. And because of the insane events of this movie, you will forget this plot point as you're watching it. And it will, at the end, be important, at least kind of, but also not really. You'll understand once we get to the end. Either way, they talk a lot in this beginning, but unlike most horror movie openings where there's, a lot of, just kind of characters talking, this is actually interesting. You get, like, a sense of who they are as characters, and they're not just totally just, like, shitty characters, like I said before. It's that kind of, like, dysfunctional family thing, which really works for this movie, and I do think really works in a lot of movies if they do it well. The son, Richard, is basically, like, saying homophobic things to Brad, who is, not gay, but, that happens a lot in real life. And I feel like as much of a stickler I am when it comes to, being an ass and, like, homophobic and stuff, I oddly enough did not fully hate this dude from the beginning. And I think maybe it's 'cause, while he's a totally insane and, like, almost, like, unreal character, which you'll see in a moment, he's funny and oddly relatable in some of the ways he acts, I guess. I don't know. Which make him lovable to a certain extent. You still think that he's an ass, but he's still lovable, if that makes any sense. Either way, they see a creepy woman in white with a baby. And it seems like she's just been chased by, like, a murder or something. At least, that's how I interpret it. She really gave me, like, the hitchhiker from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like, remake vibes. Either way, she's not talking. She seems really detached. I think this is quite effective, personally. Something that I find really creepy, and it makes sense why they would want to help her rather than, just, like, the dumb thing where they'll just be like, oh, let's pick up this hitchhiker. Like, it makes sense in this case, I feel like they would think that she, just had something really awful happen to her and she needs to get to safety. So either way, most of the family leaves to try and find a house or something, for help. And here's where we see how, odd Richard really is. He does not go with the family. He decides to go out into the open forest and masturbate, where I feel like a family could easily stumble upon him. So yeah, while this is insane, I think it oddly works for the story, and I don't really know how to explain that, how it does work for the story, but I'm gonna say, like, while over-the-top sexual moments in horror are a common thing and annoy me probably more than the average horror fan, I usually hate that they're in a movie. This one didn't really bother me that much, and I kind of, like, don't mind that it's in the movie. Like, you know, I wouldn't, you know, if I were to make this movie, I wouldn't take it out. Like, I don't know. You know, I think part of it is because they don't focus on it too long, and it fits the oddity of his character, I guess. I don't know. So either way, then it shows the boyfriend, Brad, with the woman in white in the car. They didn't go off, you know, it was just the other people. And he talks to the woman about her baby, whose face is covered in blankets, and he asks if the baby can breathe, you know, because, you know, probably can't. And she responds laughing and saying that the baby is dead, which is fucking creepy as hell. Then he lifts up the blankets to see what looks like a mutilated dead baby face, and he screams. This interrupts Richard's masturbation session, much to his dismay. That was kind of funny, because he was, like, just about to climax, and then he hears a scream and has to stop. Sorry, that's so weird, but it's so funny. Sorry. All the family, like, run to the car. The woman in white is gone, and Brad has been taken away in this hearse, which is admittedly a weird part of this movie, but it's still scary, and I really don't mind it. And then they find, and, like, the woman in white is gone, right? And then, they drive off, you know, wanting to find him, and then they find his mutilated body in the road soon after. But you don't really see the body, you see the body, like, from the body's perspective, and they're looking down on it. And, you know, they really linger on this, actually. And it seems like it's very bad, like, just like a pile of body parts, basically, which I don't think I've really ever seen in another horror movie where it's just, like, this really weird mutilation to the point where it's, like, doesn't seem like it's a body anymore, just, like, a pile of stuff, you know? So that was interesting. And even though I am a lover of gore, you know, I watched the whole Saw franchise, I love it. I love movies like the Final Destination movies and, like, Terrifier. And while I do think this movie may have benefited from showing some of the gore, considering how long they focus on the bodies, it really doesn't take much away from the scare or the effectiveness of the movie, fortunately. Because that does pull me out of movies sometimes where, like, you know, there's just really no gore. Not to say that gore is something that you need to have in a horror movie. Like, for example, in this movie, they don't really have it for the most part, and it's still really effective. So I think that just shows how good of a movie it is, you know? Either way, they all see his body, and, you know, like I said, they linger on it. And Marion, you know, the girlfriend, basically goes catatonic, and, like, she doesn't really talk and stays in kind of, like, this trance after he dies. And then we see the brother Richard, like, really upset and freaked out by the way his sister's acting. It really humanizes him and makes you feel bad for him and like him, I guess. The others are upset too, but he seems the most affected, which is interesting. And either way, throughout this whole movie, part of the fear and tension that kind of, you know, keeps repeating throughout it is that they are on this one road that, like, never seems to end. And there's, like, you know, no one on this road. And there's, like, other weird stuff, like the time is incorrect, you know? It seems like they're in this weird kind of purgatory. Which I personally find horror movies that heavily feature long, like, houseless roads are really scary and effective. I don't think I've seen too many of them, and maybe there are more of them, like, in existence than I realize. If there are any good ones, please suggest them to me. I love the movies I've seen that are like that. They're really scary to me. So one thing that is amazing about this movie is that it really shows the family collectively going insane and becoming more and more afraid and creeped out in their own separate and different ways, you know? It's perfect in that aspect, really. They do an amazing job of this. And it's really gradual, too. Depending on which character, it might not be super gradual, but it just depends on the point in the movie and the character. It's really interesting. It makes you not want to look away from the movie, even when there isn't much, happening. There's not like necessarily like a ton of action throughout the whole movie. But there's so much character stuff going on. It's so interesting. Even if they're just having maybe a somewhat mundane conversation, although I don't think there's really anything in this movie that is mundane, it's still, there's so much tension and it's so scary and it's so emotional and pulls you in. And either way, after a while of Marion being catatonic, still in this like weird state, but she actually creepily sings Jingle Bells in a way that like sounds like she had like just cried, which I mean she had. And either way, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie, I'm gonna be honest, because they linger on it for a while. She like slowly sings Jingle Bells, and I think she basically gets through the whole song. And like you also see the family's reaction because they're also just freaked out by it, like the audiences, and it's just so creepy. And I love it. That's just a really great part of this movie, man. And eventually she's out of this state and she says that she's pregnant, which is presumably, part of the reason why she, was in this state when she found out that Brad died. And presumably the baby is Brad's. I'd, safely assume, I don't think there's any, suggestions that she, had cheated on him or anything. So, either way, it's made worse by the fact that she was planning to break up with him before he died. The whole situation is just so fucked up, and I love it. It's great. And no one else knows it but the viewer, that Brad was actually preparing to propose, which makes it even more fucked up. This movie is so fucked up and has, like, so many layers. It's like an onion, as Shrek would say. Making a reference to Shrek while I'm talking about a horror movie. Interesting. And then Brad tries to ease the tension after she says that she's pregnant, and tries to, like, I guess, lessen the judgment of his sister. Again, humanizing him and making us like him. What he says is something about, like, like he smokes weed or something, like he admits it, although I feel like they would have all known that by the way he acts, like, I don't know. Which is also, it's also humorous as much as it is emotional to me. I don't know why that was just, like, so, like, it hit me. I don't know. But either way, this scene reminds me of that, like, Thanksgiving scene in Friends. It's, like, the same energy, Either way, Richard gets taken and killed, and they find him again. And it's depressing as hell. I love it. It's made sadder by the fact that the sister is, like, finally talking again, like, now that Richard is not there. She, like, gets out of that catatonic state. And I don't know, that just stood out to me. Once Richard died, it was so impactful and haunting. You could really feel them grieving. And either way, this is where the mom, like, goes insane. She basically becomes unaware that Richard is dead, but is also aware at the same time, Kind of like she's just crazy, I guess. She actually, like, draws the stick figure, of Richard's dismembered body. And she also kind of acts like an out-of-control child, I guess you could say. This is so gross. She eats the pie they were bringing, like, to, the dinner with, like, her hands, and it's, like, it gets all over her face. It's really disgusting. And she, jokingly, puts a shotgun in her mouth. And there's this really tense scene where they have to get the gun away from her because she is insane and dangerous both to herself and others. And I love this part of the movie so much. Because, one, it is inherently a tense situation where someone is unpredictable and making everyone feel uncomfortable and unsafe. But especially when it's someone like a mother or wife who you love and who is not normally like that. So it's like a moral dilemma as well. It's very interesting and just terrifying. It's one of the scariest parts of the movie, in my opinion. And eventually she does shoot her husband in the leg. So this adds another element to the whole, like, situation. So much is happening, and I love that when movies, there's just so much happening. You will never really, like, be bored with this movie. So that's, like, obviously a very great compliment. And then the mom babbles about the idea that Richard was not the father's child, and that she actually cheated on him, and Richard was actually the child of this other man. And she reveals to the daughter unintentionally that the father had cheated on her in the past. Considering the father's reaction to the second thing, which, proves that it is a true thing, it makes me think that the first thing was true too. He just, didn't know it. Like, I think that maybe Richard actually wasn't his son. I mean, it's never revealed, and she was crazy in that time, so we don't know for sure, but I believe that, Richard wasn't actually his son. And I have to say, this little part here that I just talked about with the mom, babbling about this and her old friend and stuff, are the weakest part of the movie, but it's fine. It's still not like an awful part of the movie or anything. It's just a little too complicated, and we're too unsure if it's true, and it's a lot of like not scary, crazy babbling in like one time, It's not like spread out anymore, and I guess it's just like the I guess most boring thing that happens in this movie, but it's really not that boring, and it really isn't that bad, and it doesn't last too long. I'd just say it's the weakest part of the movie. So either way, the mom jumps out of the car while it's going, which, in addition to the obvious repercussions of that, it's scary since every time they stop, someone gets taken, and they inevitably see the hearse, and Frank shoots at it. It turns out that she hadn't been taken by it, but Frank accidentally shot her. And we get our bit of gore for this movie as we can see the brain part of her head, which is pretty gross. She's still alive though, so they put her in the back of the car. So yeah. Then there's this part of the movie that I really enjoy. It's probably oddly enough the least tense part of the movie, other than the very beginning. Marion and her father are talking to one another about like good things, like kind of happy things, hopeful things, trying to calm down, because they're obviously in this very awful situation that has been scary this entire time, and just emotional this entire time. And the father actually writes a list of things to do when he gets out of this situation. And I think since we've gotten so attached to these characters and this whole journey, it's been terrifying. You just want to get out of it with them. So something as relatable as that just hits really hard. Like the idea of like wanting to try something you always put off, or to watch a show, like something normal and bland that hits so hard when you were so invested in the story. And if you watch this movie, I don't know how you couldn't be just absolutely invested in this story. So that was something that really stood out to me about this movie. After this, the mom is presumably dead. And the dad starts like drinking. I think he had encountered the like ghost, the like woman in white, I guess. I don't know if she's a ghost or whatever she is. But, and then like I said, he starts drinking, demands to drive anyways, and he even becomes like abusive, which we find out that both the drinking and the abuse are issues he's had in the past. This adds an uncomfortable and very emotional tone to the movie, because to some extent you've seen things from his side and you felt for him this whole movie. It's a very odd thing. You can almost relate to him struggling with his demons while like hating him. And you can see like the love and fear that Marion has for him during this time. It's very sad and haunting. So he ends up knocking her out by like punching her. And eventually they like make amends, so that they can survive and be a family, because he's not fully in his right mind, I'm not trying to take the blame off him or anything. I was still like hating him, but this situation would be hard to deal with. So they eventually go out of their vehicle despite knowing the danger at this point, because they know that they're not just going to be able to leave this, because they haven't this whole time. They've just been on the same road in these same woods. They run through the woods, like shooting at the woman in white and trying to find like any kind of help or anything. I think they find like a building thinking that maybe there'll be someone there. It's a very scary scene and like a very good climax to all of this. And I think what's so effective is that you can see that they clearly care about one another and are trying so hard to survive after just having such an awful interaction between one another, with him being like abusive. It's such an odd, interesting thing. And eventually the dad is killed and she has to survive on her own, which is really scary. But then the woman in white tells her that they aren't going to kill her. which I don't really know the reasoning of that, but I don't really mind it. So I think I'm gonna note something here. I personally am not a fan of like ghost, spirit, paranormal horror, which this movie delves into somewhat, because technically like the main threat is something that is kind of like paranormal-y, but we also don't really get described in the movie, other than my eye other than some of the obvious family issues where like first like the mom's kind of like a threat and the dad's like a threat. So you know while I don't like that genre, um I really like this movie, and I don't feel like that part like really affects it really. I feel like there's like this movie and a few other good to great movies where like they feature some paranormal type stuff, but they have an amazing story and also deal with the paranormal side of it well. To where it's still a really great movie to me, which I think just shows the strength of like the script and the people working on it and everything. So that's cool. And either way, we find out that Marion had like dreamt all this, or I guess can't think of the word. So let's just say dreamt all this while she was like in a hospital after her family died in the almost car accident at the beginning, which apparently wasn't an almost car accident, but a real and fatal one. But then in a post-credit scene, which I only found out existed like after watching it shows people like cleaning up and finding the note that the father had made saying that he was like what he was going to do after he got out of this. So then we know it actually happened. So think what you want, but I like this ending better. The first one was a little disappointing to me. But I like it a lot with this extra twist, and that note after the fact is just haunting, man, like knowing that like he didn't make it, but he was talking about the things that he would do when he made it out. That's obviously just inherently like heart-wrenching. And I'm gonna be honest, when I finished the movie without the post-credit scene, I didn't really believe that it had, like that it hadn't happened, that just wasn't believable to me, and I also didn't want to believe it. Especially like with that odd dude who drove the hearse, that was just also very, unbelievable to me if it didn't have the post-credit scene. So yeah, it definitely made it much better for me. So either way, let me know your thoughts on Dead End. Tell me what movies you would like me to review or rank. I would love to watch the movies that you love. Please help me out by liking, subscribing, commenting. I review horror movies. I will leave the playlist here if I remember. Thanks for the nice chat, and goodbye.